Hi, everyone. Welcome to this amazing interview series where I get to have the opportunity to interview people that I really admire and really care about and have deep conversations about things that I don't hear on the news and that I see in our community as really prevalent issues. My name's Lee Perry, and this is my honored guest, Gabrielle Milch.
Hi,
Hi, Gabbie. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. So I have known you for a long time, years now at this point, and I look up to you as a lifelong activist and a kind of like a person who's in the community sounding the alarm for things that I'm very passionate about, and that's mostly water quality. So I'd love to hear about like your story and how you started and where you come from.
Well, I've always been a water person, and when I was growing up, I lived in Central Florida, and
Mm-hmm.
I lived in DeLand, and I was a windsurfer and a water skier, and my life really revolved around the water, and I hung out on the St. Johns River with my friends and headed to New Smyrna Beach, and it was a great experience, and everything was the water was really clean, and it was just really nice, and there wasn't a huge amount of people around at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got interested in protecting the water, and came back from a little trip up north and wound up heading to Rollins College for the environmental studies program. And first class I had was about environmental impact statements, and that really motivated me to learn more about environmental impacts. And I was kind of shocked about the whole process. It was pretty intensive back then, and I got a really good internship at the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, and I went in and made a statement about the Martin Marietta clearing wetlands to build a laser testing range. So I was taking an environmental law class at the time. And fortunately, I got a job with the St. Johns River Water Management District as my first professional job. And I was in enforcement and compliance. And I worked on also doing as-built certification of all these stormwater management systems that we've built in Central Florida. And we used to be known as like some of the best, had the best stormwater management system because, we get 54 inches of rainfall a year, and
Mm-hmm.
we got all this impervious surface.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and then I realized that, regulation wasn't the way to go, and that we really needed education and to talk about things a little deeper than we were at the time.
Yeah. Well, that's the reason why you're here is because like I really want to have the opportunity to talk a little deeper about, you know, water in general. It's like have a deep conversation about how our water quality and water accessibility issues affect everyday people today in Central Florida. And so through that time, like what did you see were some of the major issues when you first started your career in comparison to now?
I think the rules were different. I've seen a real cutback, a drawback on a lot of the rules. I've seen a lot of rules, be changed, and a lot more harm that can occur to our resources than I think people understand. And I came in the time of no net loss wetlands, and wetland impacts were looked at, and I think we're really changing how we're doing business, and growth, and the economics of it all is really taking the front seat of it, and we're not as protective of as our water quality and quantity as we have been in the past.
Yeah. Okay, well, maybe talk to me right now about some of the things you're working on in the community and what is kind of your focus right now. If you could get the word out about XYZ, what would they be?
Well, I have a position with the St. Johns River Keeper, and it's a advocacy activation group, and it's been around for about 20 years. And I'm very lucky to be working in the Middle Basin because the St. Johns River is 310 miles long,
Mm-hmm.
and so I've got like about 100 miles of it, in Orange, Seminole,
Mm-hmm.
Volusia, and Lake counties are all along the river there, and we have a lot of nutrient problems with the wastewater discharges and a lot of septic tanks that are haven't been maintained over the years and don't really treat for nutrients. And also a lot of wastewater discharges that are upsetting. And then fertilizer, of course, we love our green lawn in Central Florida. People move from the north and they want a palm tree and a beautiful lawn. And used to teach at Extension for one of my jobs, and it's just amazing to me that we use our drinking water to put it on our grass.
Yeah.
And I don't think people really understand what that means.
Yeah.
Because we have like a safe yield of how much water we can withdraw from the aquifer and keep it protected and not having saltwater intrusion. And that's the Central Florida Water Initiative is something that I've been following since its inception. And
tell us a little bit about that.
So they have to come up with a 20-year water supply plan, and the water management districts, all 5 of them, work with their science, their hydrologists and permitting people, and how much water is allowed to be withdrawn from the aquifer and used for our daily uses, and then for our irrigation and all the commercial uses of water.
Yeah.
And they have to try to make sure that we're not doing environmental damage, because if you take too much water out of the aquifer and it doesn't recharge, if we have a drought, there can be a lot of ecological damage to the wetlands. Will change their plants, and it's a long time kind of a thing. It's not something you're going to see right away, but there's a big impact. Sinkholes and things.
Oh, for sure. It's kind of wild to me because there's like no way here in the state of Florida where we can put like a building moratorium out there because we're preempted from being able to do that. But then I think about how much developers are trying to lean on their property rights, and those who have access to land, they're putting impermeable surfaces and developing them out and over permitting beyond like the urban service area where we have water reclamation in many cases. And they're putting all these like water pump stations out in the middle of our rural areas, and to sustain all this growth in urban sprawl. And it's connected to so many things. I'm part of so many groups like Orlando YIMBY that talk about like how we can design our communities better for our quality of life to go up. But everyone needs water, so it's not even about our quality of life at a certain extent. It's about just our survival. And I think that as much as I love to see the Central Florida Water Initiative taking place, I don't know if those conversations that are being had by those 5 water management districts, I don't think that those conversations are making its way into our elected officials' ears at a local level or even at a state level, to the extent where we're taking those conversations seriously and being able to like proactively remove any obstacles that can help us slow down the demand for water right now.
Yeah, I think smart growth and low impact development are really important in all of the new development that's going on. And a lot of the people that are coming from the north, they want that Florida lawn, they want the palm tree and the greenness, because it's what it seems like it is here. We kind of live in a fairy book land in some respects, because we're actually putting our drinking water on our landscapes, our lawns, and so now there's a big push to take the reuse water and make it to potable water.
Yeah.
Which I think if we had a more aggressive water conservation policies and practices, which hopefully we're going to have, but I don't see it yet. And if we could get people to understand, and I don't know if we need like a welcome wagon when you move to Florida. Here's the handbook of our natural resources. You want to have springs, you want to have pretty lakes, and you can't do some of these things, and HOAs are really hard. I live in an HOA, and my HOA has grown over the years with their rules, but having that perfect lawn is a very difficult.
Well, you brought up something about conservation efforts and a push for conservation efforts. before we go to that, I just want to say I feel like the majority of residential areas that I go to that aren't locked in an HOA, the people don't really like do anything special with their lawns. Like there's a lot of people who will spend that extra money to, beautify their landscape and fertilize it so they always have that lush green. But I think that that's actually a minority. Like I feel like a lot of homeowners, they just mow kind of the weedy grass that they have. It's really like looking at the landscaping code and like trying to make sure that we're not automatically like requiring sod as the first and only option for development to like combat erosion when new development goes in. It's like there are so many other native alternatives that flower and provide nectar all year for insects, that really need it and are struggling right now. But that's a whole other conversation. I would even say, when you talked about conservation, we went through a crisis, and we're still going through a crisis right now with COVID. And there have been many emergency notices that have gone out from local municipalities and from utility, like OUC, utility companies that have basically said, we're in a deficit of liquid oxygen because of so many people being in the ICU, and we need everyone to please do everything you can to reel back your water consumption. Did we
for
pass
irrigation? Yeah.
for irrigation too, but just in general, I mean, they were asking, do you think we passed or failed that?
Well, I have some pretty big concerns regarding that, because some of the information that I got was that when we did the all out TV shows, the different news channels, and in the newspapers and things, we tried to get that message out, the utilities, about that, and I don't think people really were listening. It's really hard. We seem to be kind of broken up, and I don't think that we only had like what I heard was there was an 8% decrease in water consumption. I mean, and when they went all out and really asked people. So hopefully that was just like a test, and that we'll be able to get to all the people to understand that life of the way the water's treated with that oxygen, they would have to boil the water too if they actually ran out of water or didn't actually have water served to them. So I don't know how to get the community to become more aware without like scaring them, but it is pretty scary. You really need to think about how much water. It's one irrigation system, you can put out 30,000 gallons of water in 15-20 minutes. Just depends on the kind of system you have, and it costs a lot of money, and it's not good for our groundwater, and we're coming up with alternative water supplies and things, but I don't think that's the answer. I think we just have to shift to a different landscape standard, the aesthetic and things. I mean, it's nice to have it look pretty, but it shouldn't cost us our drinking water.
No way, because we all need that to survive, And I really feel like we all think, and I say we all because I really thought this up until recently when I started dipping my toes in politics. I think a lot of people just assume that when they vote, that they put elected officials in seats where they just figure these types of things out. And that can be true in many cases, but there's so many other cases where we need the public pressure, we need the public conversation, we need the input. And that's why, I'm even doing this video series, like, it's the weekend. I could be, sitting by the pool or whatever, I don't know.
Walking my dog.
But I'm choosing to spend this time to advocate for this thing that I'm passionate about and bring incredible leaders to the table to talk about what you're seeing, because it takes all of us to amplify that voice on, we demand stronger legislation, we demand better policies to ensure that our water, our survival is going to be spoken outright and included in like the decision-making process. I don't see our wetlands and our aquifer really being discussed to the level that it should be in the room where people are making decisions in local politics. Yeah.
Yeah, over the years, I've observed a lot of different city and county commission meetings, and all the people who get elected are highly intelligent typically, and they know a lot about a lot. When you get elected, there are a lot of things that you don't know, and once you start to learn, but it's only as good as the briefings you get from the staff.
Yes.
And that's hard because sometimes it seems like at the upper levels, the grassroots staff kind of people, they know where the problems are, but it doesn't really sometimes get filtered through to the elected officials, which I don't understand that. But I know that economics and development is where we're at, and we're growing by leaps and bounds, and we need housing and we need these things, but we also need to consider the quality of life, not just about where you live, but we don't want to put people in harm's way in the floodplain. Like, I hear these developments coming through. Okay, well, they're 2 feet above the floodplain, so their houses won't flood, but perhaps their roads will, and they won't be able to get out. And Florida is really finicky. We get periodic droughts, we get periodic floods, and with this climate change going on, there was a 6-inch rainfall in Sanford about 2 weeks ago, and it totally flooded the downtown. In like 2.5 hours they got 6 inches of rain, and it was videos of people standing with their feet up, and the water's flowing over. I mean, it dissipated, but I mean, there are people whose homes are in the path of that water, and got to get them out of the way.
Yeah, it's basically like what was that, like a Tuesday? You know what I mean? Like, it's just like a normal day. It wasn't even like a huge hurricane was here or anything. And, we see so many flooding issues and water issues, and really in the development process, and even in our local political process, water's like in the way of development when you look at the case by case approval process. And it's we're so hands off, right? You actually said something that really inspired me. We're so hands off to the process of what happens to our water that things are happening over time, and people aren't even really noticing in many cases, right? There are some people who have moved here and they go to like Blue Springs, and they see Blue Springs and they think it's beautiful, it's so gorgeous. But I was here 15, 17 years ago. It was a completely different place. Like, I can't even go to Blue Springs anymore because it looks so different. And I have friends that have been here for 30, 40 years that go to Wekiva, and they can't even look at the water because they're so disheartened by the quality of the water. And you said something to me when I was first starting to learn about these problems that really struck a chord with me, is that we sell our water too cheap. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, about what you mean by we don't pay enough for our water.
Yeah, it's interesting because we pay more for cable TV and our internet than we do for our water bill, but we can live without that, but we can't live without our water.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny. Like, I live in a community of 2,600 homes, and we have a private utility, not a government-run utility.
Okay.
And they need rate increases for people, and like, I think my water bill is about $75 a month. I use about 5,000 to 6,000 gallons, where my neighbors come over and they're like, oh my gosh, I had $150 water bill. Well, they were watering their lawn, and where I water it when it needs it. But the utilities, it costs money to repair these things. And I think where the infrastructure in my subdivision is like 30, 35 years old, and it's starting to fail.
Yeah.
And hasn't been invested in properly. And I don't really think we have the governmental chutzpah to go out there and get that done. DEP, they do a good job of having water that's, what do they say? It's going to be, I can't think of the word right now, but we'll come back to that. But but it's really frustrating in many ways how we deal with our water supply.
Yeah, actually, it was so funny. One of the first briefings that I was a part of with our local utility at the county, they were talking about how they had very competitive rates, like as low is in the country, like we're one of like the lowest. And then the very next presentation, and they were like proud of that, they were proud of that, like they saw it as like more equitable. But then the very next presentation was this director of like sustainability for our water division who was talking about all of these infrastructural like developments that she wants to do. Like she wants to create better reclamation locations across the county, but like we don't have a budget. And I pointed it out that you have this like pride of how cheap our water is in comparison to like private utilities and etc. But then we have all these like ambitious goals to like preserve our water and to help consume and to help consume in a responsible way, and yet we're not charging people for it. And so even like the tiered version, I even brought up where
conservation rate structure.
Yes, conservation rate structure. Thank you. Where if someone is a very large consumer, they should be charged a higher rate past a certain gallon in a tiered system, so that people who might be in a more underserved, very more conscientious lower income bracket that really can't afford to be hit with a penalty, so that other people can have this infrastructure that may or may not impact their day-to-day lives. There are people who do not care, even if you came and begged them, please conserve. They demand to have their lush green lawns. They demand to take their 15, 20-minute showers, and they should have to pay way more for that inconvenience to everyone else, because at the end of the day, there's only a limited amount of potable drinking water for us all to share. And I
without harm to the
without
resources.
harm, of course.
I mean, we can do things like desalination, although we're not at the ocean, and that costs a lot of energy to do desal, because that's always like, well, we'll just desal. We have plenty of water. It's just the cheap water is going, and that's the superficial aquifer, the lower or the upper Floridan aquifer, and saltwater intrusion along the St. Johns River, can become a really bad problem for folks if you have your own shallow well and you're not hooked onto a utility, and you have your own well and it's 150 to 300 feet deep, and they're pulling this big amount on the municipal wells that so I don't think people really realize that. I had an experience, and I think it was in 2010. There was a cold snap, and the strawberry industry, they pumped their allotted amount of water that they could through their consumptive use permitting for 10 days to protect the strawberries, and about 150 sinkholes opened, and I think about 700 and something wells went dry. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, I don't know how we would go, I'm at Home Depot, you're at Home Depot, and I say, hey, did your well go dry? I mean, that isn't a typical conversation that we would have.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they've done really a lot of work. That was 2010. They've done a lot of work, and they've really taken the technology to the next level to protect the strawberries and not pump that much water. But, a 10-day pumping, I think the aquifer dropped like 60 feet. It's a different watershed than we're in, but we all have, that safe yield, the amount of water that you can safely pump out of the aquifer without that cone of influence impacting, the people around us.
Yeah.
So that's kind of scary to me. That's always been something I've worried about.
Yeah, just so for people who don't know like what a sinkhole is, so our entire state is basically made up of limestone, which is like a very porous, kind of spongy looking kind of material that is over time, it's calcium based, so acid rain sometimes can really cause these holes to become much larger. But for the most part, these holes are supposed to be a way for water to be able to go through our various surfaces underground. And then that ultimately becomes our aquifer. And that's where we drill down and put lift stations so we can pull water out. And then if you do that times a lot to sustain all this growth, then what happens is that these holes that are there, that are in the limestone, are not able, the water is helping to keep that weight of all the development on top. And when you deplete the water, it just becomes these holes that, basically become sinkholes. They just collapse. And we have those happen here in Orange County all the time. I remember one in San.
Most our lakes are sinkholes. So.
Oh yeah, true.
They're spring fed. Everybody says, "Oh, but my lake is spring fed."
Yeah, it's like, well, yeah. In Deltona, there was one sinkhole kind of close to where I lived that took a whole half of a house in with it, and it could kill someone overnight. It's there you could be gobbled up by the land, and it's a scary reality that we all should feel responsible for each other's public safety risks of these sinkholes, but instead, it's very like isolated cases where they're like, oh, that's a sinkhole. That's not related to my 15-minute showers. That's not related to my overdevelopment way outside of the urban service area, and it's all connected.
Yeah, well, the aquifer and the potentiometric pressure and the amount of recharge, and the more, if we use low impact development in these areas, I mean, we've got projections of population coming here, by 2070, we just did a report with Thousand Friends of Florida, and, they're talking about another, like we're going from 300 or 480,000 in Seminole County to 700,000 people. So, I mean, there is a kind of a carrying capacity of the land for quality of life. And you spoke a little bit before about property rights. And so I've lived here a long time, and I feel like my property rights are being infringed upon, and that we need to think about the existing people who live here's property values.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting discussion, because I know that our comprehensive plans, which are kind of like the models of how we run our cities, they are up, and there's a new element that's being required by the legislature to put in the property rights element. And I really think that we need to think about that, and that's something that a lot of people aren't going to go sit at the county commission meetings and listen to these in-depth studies and talks and read up on that stuff, but it's nice to have new people here and everything, but we have to inform them about what we've got. But I mean, we have Disney World here, and it's its 50th anniversary, and I mean, I grew up in the area, and so you see how much water is used at those facilities and things. And so I'm all for reusing water at, in those big areas, but we have these, acres and acres of subdivisions, and we're impacting our wetlands and some of the natural resources and nutrients in our waterways, and toxic algae blooms. It sounds pretty sad,
Yeah, it all adds up.
Like,
I mean,
where can you go? Is there a place to go?
This is exactly why these conversations are so important, because we had 800 manatees die last year, and I didn't hear a whisper of anything from our elected officials anywhere really. There were a select few that really wanted to champion to get these manatees rescue efforts and what have you. But in terms of being proactive enough to anticipate this is going to happen again with a cold snap, the activists that I speak to on a regular basis are working their tails off. But it's a crisis. It's a crisis, and it's just a symptom. I mean, if something as big as a manatee is dying, it's a symptom of our human impact on the land, and it's only going to creep up to us. I can't help but think, is there something greater happening here? Because it just feels like we're in this stronghold where when we do try to look at how we can change local policy, and we are preempted in all these different ways so that we can't, not in every way, but in a lot of ways, it feels like people are trying to make as much money as possible off of the cheapest amount of land as quickly as possible before Florida's past the point of habitable. And that's something that people don't want to say, is you brought this up the last time I interviewed you for Ideas for Us. We're at a 390 million gallon deficit in our water today, not the projected growth, not the comprehensive plan for the next 30 years, projected growth of 2.8 million people that we're currently talking about our Vision 2050 plan, where you're saying that today, with the population we have right now, we're at over a 350 million gallon deficit in our water.
It's really tricky to talk about that because we're at a deficit from, so they want to protect the superficial groundwater, and that's really important. And so a lot of these utilities have invested a lot of money in taking and reusing the water, reclaimed water. And so for every one house of reuse water that's out there, 5 other houses, that's just an average, maybe, have to use water. So it's like, it is a good solution, and coming up with these alternative water supplies investment is really good. But I sometimes feel like we lose it, and we should just ask people to conserve. And I know that there's a lot of people who that they get uncomfortable about that, or how do you ask? I mean, we look back at what happened in Orange County with the COVID and the oxygen supply and treatment and everything. Like how many people really knew that we were having a water issue? So
even when they did know, how many people actually went out of their way at all?
Well, maybe that's where the elected officials could be more proactive, and they could actually talk about it. I mean, I know that the meetings are on TV now and Zoom, and people, with all of the different ways we've gone electronic in these meetings. So, but it's hard for people who are, working their jobs and living their lives and running their kids around if they have them, and to stop and actually understand what's going on. And I have been following it so long, I sometimes forget that people just don't know. And I like, do we need a welcome wagon? Saying, hey, you're moving to Florida, things are different here. If you like it the way it is now, then you need to, participate in our community and understand better about water conservation, about the amount of nutrient pollution that we put out. And but it's hard because it's, you hear these commercials, go ahead and feed your lawn, and it's like, how do people know? So
well, I guess, to talk about what you could do as the individual, right? I really believe that just looking at whatever piece of property that you may own or are near, because if you're in an HOA or in an apartment and there's someone else who's making the landscaping rules on your behalf, really try to have conversations with them. Really try to pound on their door, or even before you move into a place, try to make that part of the dialogue early on so that you're holding them accountable to try and think about these different themes of replacing their sod with native plants. If you have the luxury of owning property, support your local nursery and buy ground covering plants that need very little to no work at all, like sunshine mimosa, dune sunflower, perennial peanut, the list goes on and on. You can plant those things and then literally create a sod replacement that doesn't need a lot of water and can just thrive and provide nectar resources for our pollinators, and it's great.
Yeah, I think Florida, we don't have like a solid winter, especially in Central Florida. And like up north, people imagine, oh, well, it gets cold and things go dormant. But we really don't have the same kind of dormancy period. And our insects and the pollinators and the birds, they travel here, and they need the food sources from our yards. And maintaining a native landscape and a more natural landscape is different. And so I think that, we can invest at our community, state colleges, at our different technical schools in how to do more than just mow, blow, and go. And like, I see some of these people, you put in these wonderful native pollinator plants and they just cut them up and they die. I mean, you see that on a lot of the roadways and things like that. So, choosing the right vegetation, watering it the right way, keeping track of all that stuff. I mean, with electronics, we're great. You can do everything from your phone, but if it's raining, turn off your irrigation. It's not that difficult. But some people they're just distracted, and this is something that if it breaks, we can't fix. I mean, it's broken right now. the system and the policy and some of those things. So I hope we can fix that. But once you get saltwater intrusion in an area, it's going to be hard to get back from that.
Yeah.
So
The other thing you can do, other than like calling your elected officials from every level and asking them to look at their landscaping ordinances or what have you, getting politically engaged, voting, those are all things you could do. Other things you can do is just really try to go out of your way to conserve water. And, I've done many discussions on things you could get, from a little bubbler on your, faucet to, destigmatize, when you have to pee, that's fine. You don't have to flush every time, but
what is that saying? If it's
yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down.
Oh my gosh, did we really say that?
I say it every day. And it's something that I'm not ashamed of, because my water bill is very low because we don't consume a lot of water, and I don't water my grass and things like that. So I just encourage you to try and do like a little self audit on how you could improve in your water quality, or water consumption. And, at the end of the day, try to educate people. Try to go out of your way to be like, hey, this is a problem. If you see a sprinkler going off when it's raining, call that company and say, what's going on? Like, you could do better.
Yeah. It's an extra duty, but it's well worth it in the long run. And I think the more that we can be proactive versus reactive, and prepare for just think about it a little differently. I mean, we have so many ecological issues going on right now. It's overwhelming with the plastics and with some of the air pollution issues and different things with coal-fired plants and the way we get our energy. I mean, energy is a huge issue. We're just talking about water, but there is a relationship, a water energy nexus, and it costs water. It costs a lot of energy to pump all this water too. Now, these utilities, they have a certain level that they kind of can pump, and so they don't always pump all of the water that they are allowed to pump. And sometimes, like, if people like during the downturn in the economy, some of these utilities couldn't cover the cost of doing some of the maintenance and just the running of the system. So each one of these utilities has a different story. And so it's not like a one solution fits all on the bigger picture, but what each of us can do individually is so much. We can do a lot.
Yeah. And then in terms of like water quality, I always say, please don't fertilize if you don't have to. If you can get away with not doing it, just please don't do it. Don't spray herbicides. You don't need to do that. If you can try to get away with it. Also, if you have a shoreline, like a retention pond or a actual natural pond, go out of your way to maybe do some water quality samples, or planting these areas along the shoreline with like submergent and emergent plants and terrestrial plants, so that you can make an ecosystem that will heal that water before it goes back down into our aquifer. That's how I look at it. It needs to be filtered, and nature gives us all the tools that we need to do this. When you talk to people in Washington, D.C., at the state, at the county, everyone's trying to find desalination plants and all these technological ways to like get water accessibility and water quality like off of our agenda. We don't need a lot of money and infrastructure to do that. All we really need is nature to run its course and to purify these water bodies using the tools that we were given from day one. And plants and fish and even mollusks, native mollusks, are also in the toolkit for purifying our water, combating algae, combating all these mosquito issues that we have, water quantity issues. An adult tree can hold up to like 60 to 100 gallons of water. Plant trees along your shoreline. There's just so many natural tools that we can use in our toolbox today.
Yeah, I think about the story of the dragonfly. So dragonflies start their life in these ponds and things, and they need a certain level of good water quality. It can't have high nutrient loadings and things. And dragonflies are amazing. They can eat so many mosquitoes. So I know people are kind of freaked out by them, but dragonflies, and all of the critters that live along those shorelines and things are really important, for our quality of life. And I know people, are afraid in some respects. I was the lakes manager for the city of Maitland, and, they always wanted the shoreline with a sandy beach and their activity center with their docks. And there just really wasn't any space left for the aquatic vegetation. And so we had, tree planting incentives, and I know you can get trees from Orange County and different things. So planting your shoreline is important, and there's different volunteer groups that come out and help you weed, and you don't have to know. I know in Seminole County we just did a shoreline protection ordinance, which the FWC had stopped requiring permits for people to on smaller lakes, smaller than 120 acres. They could just so there was this mass time when people just went in and mowed down all the vegetation along their shorelines and things. And I know it's beautiful to sit in your house and look out and see, the waterways and things, but plants provide habitat for so many things. So you and I know we've talked about the shoreline enhancement, and that's kind of a specialty thing, but there's so much to read out on the internet and things, and YouTube videos and things. So if you do live on a lake, it would be great if you could at least do, I think it's supposed to be 50% of the shoreline has to have vegetation on it, at least in Seminole County. I'm not sure about Orange, how their rules are now, but.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, a point that I forgot to make back when you had brought up the Central Florida Water Initiative, something that you taught me was about the appointed seats of the Public Service Commission and how they basically have the ability to make their rates whatever they want. These are typically private utilities that are appointed to this Public Service Commission that basically do their own self-reporting and basically create their own rates. And it sounds like a monopoly, like a conglomerate monopoly that forces us to have to be codependent on whatever they feel the decisions need to be without considering what the public really needs, right?
Yeah. Well, consumer advocacy is really important, and the Public Service Commission regulates energy, gas, water utilities, and wastewater. And it's a very interesting group of people, and the rules in there have been watered down, and really a lot of these rate increases can just be put in. The cost of fuel has gone up, the cost of pipes have gone up, the cost of the batteries that run the generators, if they have generators. So costs are going up. Our cost of water, like you said, is pretty low, but it's going to have to go up, and that's really difficult for people with fixed incomes. You have a budget, and do you take your medicine, do you take your do you water your yard, kind of things. I don't want it to be like that, and most people aren't in that position. A lot of people are, but Public Service Commission, check them out online. It's interesting. They just passed some rules where water utilities, private wastewater and water utilities don't have to go through the rate increase hearings anymore and be questioned about the quality of the water they're serving us and things like that. So the Public Service Commission, check it out. It's appointed by the governor. He puts those folks on. They just had a change in one of the folks on that committee, but they have a lot of power, and they're appointed, not elected. So that would be nice if they would have to be elected.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for educating us. And is there anything closing out that you would want people to know?
I think most important thing that I would like everyone to kind of think about is that water is life, and clean water, clean drinking water, and making sure that future generations have a nice place to live is important. So please, conserve as much as you can, and get more informed, and please vote.
Yay! So that was beautiful. I don't have anything to add on top of that. But if you want to get in touch with you, how could they be a part of your organization?
So you can check out our website for the St. Johns River Keeper. We've got a lot of great videos on there about the toxic algae blooms, about biosolids, which we didn't cover today, and the Free the Ocklawaha campaign. Right now we're collecting, I forgot, got to give that a plug.
Yeah.
We're collecting signatures for that, on that to free the Ocklawaha and the Silver River, which will be good fresh water into the St. Johns River. So stjohnsriverkeeper.org, and email me or give me a call. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for making this time. I really appreciate it. And thank you all so much for tuning in. And I'm so excited to continue the conversation and advocate for water. Okay. Be a water advocate. So thank you.
Thank you.